Good luck, sir.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I hope I get all your attention. I know you're all busy eating lunch, but maybe you can sit down for a little while and to listen what we're going to tell you about climate change adaptation, DRR, and development, which is something that we've been involved in thanks to our work for the GAR, which was launched yesterday for UNISDR. And this work really started around a year ago when the UNISDR asked us, which is the CircumEnvironment Institute, to do something a bit out of the ordinary and look not just at DRR, but also at climate change and how climate change and development links up with DRR and HFA and other policy regimes that are relevant in this respect. And so what do we really mean if we want to understand the linkages between climate change and disaster risk and development? Well, I think this picture really illustrates that kind of connection, at least for us it is. What we're going to see here is a family which has been flooded in 2013 in Guatemala. And of course, from a DRR perspective, you could say, well, this really represents exposure to a flood event. And if you know a little bit about climate change, you might even know that we can expect climate change to exacerbate certain flood risk in certain areas, which means that the exposure will increase, right? But this doesn't really give us the full picture, right? I mean, we would be more interested in why these people actually have to live in these very precarious conditions. And this really focuses our attention on the underlying drivers of risk and the vulnerability of people. And that's exactly what we wanted to do in our work, which was to kind of advance the dialogue between the DRR community, the adaptation community, and focus their attention on the underlying drivers of risk and how their work on DRR and adaptation can inform development and development policies all around the world. So, of course, we're not the first one to look at these issues. And this framework here, which was developed by the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change in 2012, is probably the most comprehensive framework to understand the linkages between development and climate change and climate viability. And the kind of underlying premises that the IPCC suggested in its work was that what we see today as disasters is really a product of climate variability, climate change, and faulty development practices. And in this understanding, development really means that it can be a remedy to vulnerability to climate, to disaster risk, but it can also be a cause, and this is a factor that we need to really understand and be self-reflective of. Why do I think this is an important issue to look at? Well, because really this year, 2015, is really a watershed moment for the international community that looks at DRR, looks at sustainability, and looks at climate change. So of course, we are here today to discuss the HFA2, we are here to discuss the GAR, and all these issues. But of course, as we then move on in 2015, we will discuss the Sustainable Development Goals in June or July, if I'm not mistaken. And then hopefully, at the end of the year, we will have a new international climate agreement in Paris. So this is really why we think 2015 is really a year of opportunity, and it's not something that will repeat itself in the near future. All right, so I know that there is confusion sometimes, some disarray when we talk about DRR and adaptation, and there's two different types of work being done, and it's two different types of communities. They have their own different language, they have their own jargon, they have their own interests. And that was a big part of our work to kind of understand the synergies and differences and similarities between these two concepts. Because if we want to understand how we're going to link them, we need to understand what makes them different, right? So if you want to make a broad-brushed definition of DRR and adaptation, you could say, well, DRR is really a systematic approach to systematically prepare people to deal with disaster risk, whereas climate change adaptation really is all about helping people to adjust to future changes. So these are you have to note the key differences here. So DRR is about dealing with reducing risk, and that's, of course, been done with prevention and preparation. And then we want to also tackle the immediate consequences of disaster risk, and we do this by recovery and emergency efforts, whereas adaptation is much about science, it's much about forecasting events, understanding impacts that may happen in the future, and adjusting then our policies towards these impacts. If we then move on a bit more, we also know that both DRR and adaptation suffer from fragmented knowledge in institutions and policies. We were here today, and I know there's ongoing negotiations on the HFA2, and we know how difficult it is to get the word climate change and adaptation into the framework. I spoke to a negotiator, which I will, of course, not mention, on Friday, and he told me, like, well, we basically have an agreement, really, on HFA2, but the problem right now is that how we link that up to adaptation, to vulnerability, and future development practices, that is the key issue. That's really the issue that are most contentious right now over there. And of course, we also need to understand that we're self-critical, that we're sometimes very poor in connecting with our stakeholders. I'm not talking about the communities that will be affected by disaster risk, but also amongst ourselves. I experienced it personally that some people will avoid the other side and may be reluctant to engage with the adaptation community if you're the DRR specialist or vice versa. And that is a challenge that we all need to acknowledge, really. But there is, of course, also space for learning, and there are ongoing efforts around the world where people very consciously combine DRR and adaptation. I don't want to do cherry picking, but one of them is currently done in El Salvador, where they have units that work on both DRR and adaptation. And those are key examples to help us inform our thinking, how we can learn from each other, really. So I have two main suggestions to make today, how we can learn from each other. And the first one really is that we need to be more honest about what we actually want to achieve, and that is really about a transformative change. And I'm going to mention another new buzzword here, which was proclaimed yesterday on the session on the GAR, which is a corrective DRR. So it's no longer just about understanding current risk, but also how we can correct current development practices that will create vulnerabilities and risk in the future. So that is as much as proactive as it is reactive, really. So we need to acknowledge the problem that, of course, right now, lots of practitioners understand adaptation as, well, a mere extension of DRR, and we need to understand that that is actually not the truth. Adaptation is about adjusting to future conditions that we don't know at the moment. We also need to engage with those that influence vulnerability, including those that create vulnerability, of course. We need to develop better guidance for local authorities so that they understand how they can combine DRR and adaptation in their work. And there's some work done on Previa, for example, which is a big UN-led program, and there's other programs around the world, but the guidance at the moment and the kind of knowledge that we have is still very fragmented. So this is what we say it's transformative change is really a key issue here. And the other one is that we need to learn to make better policies. And learning isn't just monitoring and evaluation. It requires it requires administrative structures that are open and flexible and transparent enough to really facilitate that kind of learning process. Because we know, of course, that disasters can spur change, it can spur policy learning. There's ample evidence for that. But what are really the preconditions? And some of the preconditions is good knowledge. And knowledge is not just the quality of knowledge. The knowledge needs to be relevant, it needs to be credible. We have to understand that, you know, some of our research and some of our scientists are doubted around the world. They feel they're viewed as manipulative, and we need to engage with these people that harbor this kind of skepticism. And of course, it also needs to be legitimate. There's a large debate currently ongoing on malpractice on knowledge and information management, and we need to be critical about that too. And then, of course, we're talking about an iterative process that is knowledge-based, so that knowledge from one event can feed into ongoing work and be corrective and can improve what we already have today. And that really relates to good governance, ultimately. It's about transparency, it's about stakeholder involvement, and I know that can be laborious, and it can be really hard, and it can be a very painstaking process, but that's really part of the democratic process if you want to achieve disaster prevention and reduction. What does the CircumEnvironment Institute do at the moment, specifically on this issue? Well, we are just about to launch a whole array of new initiatives that will be funded over the next 2 to 5 years, and one of these initiatives is initiative on development and disaster risk reduction, and it really wants to look further into vulnerability as a core principle or core framework to understand and inform DRR and adaptation. And if you want to know more about this, you can talk to my colleague Frank Tamala, who sits over there, who leads this project. And if you want to know a bit more right at the moment, you can, of course, read our background paper. If you go on the GAR's website, you can click on the background papers, and you can download it there. The background paper is entitled Disaster Risk Reduction, Climate Change and Development. And we also have prepared a discussion brief based on this background paper, which you can pick up from my colleague Carly and Michael, which is somewhere here. Where is he? And yes, please, if you have any questions, please ask them now. I think we have another 2 minutes. Dead silence.
Okay. Thank you very much.